All right, everyone. It looks like it's about 10 after 6 Central Time. It's Thursday, December 1st, and this is session 3 of Intro to Coding Live. So thank you, everyone, for joining. The recording has started. We're going to hop into session 3 tonight, which is going to be talking about built-in methods. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the built-in methods around string, number, and then arrays. Before we get into the actual session tonight, we kind of left off yesterday with doing the total change do challenge, and I wanted to revisit that and just cover that again, and then also show an alternate way of solving the problem. I don't think Moya's here, but one of the suggestions he had shouted out was that you can solve this using toFixed. And you absolutely can, but there are some more steps to it than just using the toFixed. And we're going to go ahead and just walk through the solution I have here right now. Excuse me. And then I'll show you how to solve it with the toFixed. And I also, and actually, you know what? Normally I mention this on day 2, but I will mention it right now. For those of you that have not been to pythontutor.com before, this is a great learning tool. It works with several different languages, including Python and JavaScript, this will be very useful for you in the beginning weeks of a boot camp when you're working with algorithms. And it's basically like an online debugger that will show you how your code works step by step. It becomes less useful when the programs that or the code that you're working with becomes object oriented and you start dealing with classes and multiple files at the same time. And also just when the files get very large. So then we'll try to move towards using like the built-in debugger in VS Code or a debugger in the console in Chrome. But for something like this is perfect. So let's go ahead and take a look at what our function looks like step by step. So let's go ahead and copy our code, and we're going to drop this in over here. And I'm going to get rid of the little true false thing that we do down here. And so we're going to visualize the execution. All right, and I'll walk us through this step by step. And actually, because and this may not have been the best thing because it's going to do it very quickly. But basically what happens when we write our code is within step 1, nothing happens here, right? So all the computer does is scan these lines of code and put them in memory and get them ready for when you need them. So the first action that our program has to take is when we call it here. And so you can see basically like this is kind of like a visual representation of what your program knows about in memory right now. So it basically knows that total change is equal to this block of code right here. And so what happens next is step 2, we actually execute total change, and we're going to feed it in with the parameters 175. So we see total change, amount paid is equal to 100, total cost is equal to 75, and it's going to do the math for us automatically here, and it's just going to spit it out at the end and show us that this is our answer. So again, probably not the best example, but I want you to be aware of this. And as we start to write some things with more parts and pieces to it, this will become more and more valuable to visualize what's going on in our program. So especially, excuse me, especially once we start doing things with loops and conditional logic, we'll see how step by step we progress through our program, and we can see what code we're hitting, why we're hitting it, and see if we're doing exactly what we think we're going to be doing or if it's doing something different. So back over here, what happens with this is like a representation. I'm just going to throw some notes in here real quick. Is so when we call so like total change 175, what the computer sees is this, right, is 175. And then when we come down here, we're going to see 100 times 100, and we're going to see 75 times 100, and the computer is automatically going to resolve that for us, right? And so we've got 10,000 and 7,500. Right, and then after that, it's going to turn around and it's going to do the math for us. So it's going to say 2,500 divided by 100. And then what it actually returns is 25. And that's the answer we see. So when we see this, it's doing all of the mathematical operation for us. And even though we see amount paid and total cost down here, what the computer sees is what we feed in when we call it, right? And so it would be the same thing for this next one. Instead of seeing 10 and 25, it would see 10 and 7.28 or 7.28, right? And it would go through all those same steps for us and return that answer. If we want to take a look at how we would solve this with using the two fixed, we can do the same thing here. So, and who can remember why it's okay that these have the same name as these up here? What concept is allowing me to do that?
You can only declare them once, and it's going to take any value you assign it.
Well, so it's
local
so,
versus okay.
Yeah, so Noel got it. It's scope, right? So these are locally scoped to the function, right? So even without this, if I try and do console.log amount paid, right, I get an error because it tells me that amount paid is not defined. Amount paid and total cost are local to this function. So the only time you can see them is after line 14 and before line 21. That's the only place you have access to these two. Now, if I were to do something like this and say, right, then I would have an amount paid at the global scope, which is different than this amount paid, right? And if I start operating an amount paid, so if I write a function that does something with amount paid and I don't feed it in and I'm modifying the one at the global scope, every time I run this function, I'm going to do something different to this one, and I'm going to keep mutating it and mutating it. And that's why scope is important when we write software, is so that it helps prevent unintended consequences and keep track of the data that we're actually manipulating. Yes, Joshua. So is that true for all parameters? Yes, everything written like on the far outside, like outside of a function, is going to be at the global scope. And so, for instance, here, we can do global scope, right? And I can say let name equal Charles. And if I say, we'll say function hello, And then I say return hello name. Now let's do a console.log hello. Oops, reference error amount paid. I've got to get rid of that. There we go. So there's hello Charles. Now, if I do something like this and I say function add last and do something like this where I say well, actually, I don't want to do that because you cannot, strings are immutable. So it wouldn't be a big deal here, but what I can do is I can still say right, and if I call this right, so every function globally has access to this. Now, if I do something, and I can also say console.log name right, and so this is available to me because it's at the global scope, even inside the function. It's available up here, it's available down here. Now, if I do something like this, right, and I change this last name, right, we won't see any difference here. I still get Charles Kubiak. Right, and if I try and do console.log last name, right, notice how as I'm typing this, it's not giving me any suggestion. Right, same thing, so I can't get to it. All right, so that is some basics on local and global scope. So global scope means that anything anywhere can reach it. Local scope is only inside of the function that you're working with. All right, so back up here, I'm just going to comment this out here for a second. Let's see here. So if we take this and I want to and we'll use the same numbers here, 7.28 and 10, right? And so if I go in here and I return amount paid minus total cost, oops, total cost, is that, yeah, amount paid total cost, right? And I'll also comment these two out. Right, let's see what we get, right? So this is where we're back to our issue here again. And if I were to take this exact same line here, right, so we'll do this as well. This way we can see if we're passing the test or not as well, right? So we get the number that we're seeing and we're also not passing, right? And so what's happening is because of the difference between the base 2 and the base 10, like we're getting these crazy trailing decimals. So what I can do here is let's pull up 2 fixed again. Right, head over to MDN. Right, and so the way I use this is by tagging it on to a number. Right, and so this 2 fixed 0 gives me that. Right, you can go all the way out to 2 fixed 50. All right, we've got all these different examples down here. All right, so if we take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.6789 and do just 2 fixed with nothing in it, it'll round it to 6, 1, so on and so forth as we go out. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what that does for us. So let's go ahead and treat this entire thing as the number that we want to fixed. Right, and if I do nothing in there, there's my 3. If I put 2 in there, right, there's my 2.72, but I'm still getting a false because we're doing strictly equal and I'm comparing it against a number. And at this point, I've got a string. So remember, when we look at 2 fixed, and this is tricky, right, like 2 fixed method formats a number using a fixed point notation. The number of digits appear after a decimal point. Return value, a string representing the given number using a fixed point notation. So I need to move this back to a number. How to convert a string to a number in JavaScript. So freecodecamp.org. Right, so we can do, it looks like we've got the number function here. All right, so we can wrap the whole thing in number. All right, so if it's a actual string and we try and convert it, it'll tell us it's not a number. So how to convert string into a number in JavaScript using the parseInt function. Right, so if I take the string of 12 and I do parseInt, right, so we'll get that. So there's our number 12. Notice how it's gold. So let's go ahead and check this out once. So if I take this whole thing and wrap it in parseInt, right, so now I get 2.00. So what is an integer?
Whole number.
It's a whole number, right? And what do we call numbers with decimal points in JavaScript? Yep, so null got it, it's a float. So convert string to a floating number JavaScript. So the JavaScript parse float function, right? So again, Geeks for Geek, they're another pretty good resource. So let's go ahead and try that. So instead of parseInt, let's do parse float. So parse float converts a string into a floating point number. 2.72. And I think it's because I have to do this. There we go. All right, so there is our no floating point decimal. We've got ourselves a number. And now we're returning true on the test. Right, so a couple of extra steps to get there. Right, so it's not just using the 2 fixed. We need to use the parse float. We have to make sure that we wrap everything so that we get the correct operations. But this is another way. So this is basically doing the exact same thing as this. It's just 2 different ways to get it done. And I think there's other ways to convert something to a number. So like if we get rid of the parse float, and I think if we put a mathematical operator in front of it, it'll do it as well. Yep. So that mathematical operator, like the plus sign, forces JavaScript to force it to a number or a floating point number as well. So it's a little shorter, but I like this because it's more explicit. You kind of have to know a trick that a mathematical operator will do it, but this is specifically designed to do it. So it lets everyone that reads your code know exactly what you're trying to do. All right. Any other questions about total change due? Okay, so we'll go ahead and kick off the actual session. So we've got built-in methods. So a method is basically, all right, have a good night, David. So a built-in method is basically a function that is bound to any given data type. So a string has its own set of built-in functions or methods. A number has its own set of built-ins, array, object, so on. Methods tend to always perform actions on or using the value being stored in that data type. The action performed may either mutate the data in place without returning a new value, or it cannot mutate the existing value, but return a brand new value, which you would need to store in a variable yourself. We are definitely going to run into basically whether or not something is being mutated, and that's just software talk for something being changed. So you can mutate your data when you change it or modify it. And this is kind of like, I will say this is something to look out for. This can be a little bit tricky. I'll probably stumble on it in something throughout the class. Because basically certain methods will mutate, certain methods won't mutate, and you usually, until you get used to it, you'll end up having to read the documents on MDM to figure out exactly what's happening. And the big warning that I'll throw out to everyone is that in JavaScript, strings are immutable, so they cannot be mutated in place. So when you run built-in methods on strings, they're always going to return a new value, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so string methods. So concat adds two strings together to make one string. MDN is the Mozilla Developer Network. All right, so the MDM web docs, this is your this is the go-to, and I recommend that, like, anytime you're trying to figure out what's going on with a built-in or like a data type or something like that, you should always try and come here first. Like, this is the source of truth for JavaScript on the internet. And I'm not saying other places won't be right, but this place is going to be right because they're helping set the standard for the language itself. All right, so for strings, we've got concat, includes, and trim. So concat, I have honestly never seen anyone use this in production code because it adds two strings together. And you can do that exact same thing with like a plus sign. It's up to you if you want to use it or not. Includes is useful. It checks to see if a string contains another string inside of it. And then trim chops off any white space characters at the beginning or end of a string. So let's go ahead and take a look at over here, and let's pull up string. And let's look at includes. All right, so the includes method performs a case-sensitive search to determine whether one string may be found within another string, returning true or false as appropriate. All right, so we can say we have the sentence, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and then we also have word, which is equal to the string of fox. And so this, so this says returning true or false. So this right here, so sentence, which is looking at this whole sentence, dot includes word looking for the word fox is going to resolve to true or false. This whole thing right here is called a ternary statement, and we haven't covered those yet, but I'll talk about those. I think I'll talk about those tonight whenever we get to our first control flow. So it'll either be tonight or on Monday, but this is just a shorthand way of doing an if-else statement. And so let's go ahead and let me open up notes for the evening. All right, so if I do something like name, oops. All right, and so let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we can say sentence dot includes, right? So includes, and I'm getting that little bar there in the way. Let me see if I can clean this up. Right, prints the standard out with new line. Oh, that's the console.log. Includes. Sometimes the auto help on this is a little fussy. All right, it doesn't want to work with me. It's just going to give me the console.log. Oops. Name. Right, and so that resolves to true. And so it doesn't return something, like it doesn't return the string or anything like that. It's always going to say true or false. And we don't have to use the variable, so we could just type a string in here. All right, we get false. And also it is case sensitive. Right, so even though like Charles is in there, it is case sensitive, so that's going to go to false. And so we could use another built-in here, right? So we could say console.log sentence to lowercase, right? And so if we take a look at this, so this is another built-in, right? This takes everything in the sentence and moves it to lowercase. So if we weren't worried about case sensitivity, we could do something where we move it to lowercase, and then we could look for if it includes Charles or not. Now, I'm going to show you something. This is where we talk about the difference between if we are going to mutate our data in place or if we're going to return a new value, right? So I created a sentence. I'm doing sentence dot to lowercase, right? And so we see it printed out over here, all in lowercase. And if I do console.log sentence again, what do you think we're going to see? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Are we going to see it like this because it's happening after I do to lowercase, or are we going to see it like this?
Original.
Yep, we're going to see the original. So let's go ahead and hit run it. Right, so there's this line, or I'm sorry, there's this line. There's the first time we console.log, and there it is a second time. And we see it like this because strings are immutable. We cannot change them, basically, like we cannot mutate them in place. So All this is doing is console.log is a built-in method on the console that is just sending a copy of sentence to lowercase to see it, and then it's immediately discarding it. So if we want to be able to see it again in the future, we actually have to save it as its own value. So we could say let lowercase sentence equal sentence that to lowercase. Now, when I run this, right, sentence is there. And if I want to see the other one, right, now I'm calling on the saved copy of this where everything is lowercase and I can continue to use it. But if I don't save it to a variable name, it is just basically making a copy of it and immediately discarding it. As soon as it goes to the next line of code, it's not saved in memory anywhere. It's just gone. You can't access it. And so that's why if we want to have a copy of it to use or to check out, we want to save it to a variable so that we can use it at a later time. Now, built-in methods can also be linked together, right? So this is going to return false, but if I take something like this and I chain it together, right? Now I get true because I'm taking my sentence, I'm making everything lowercase. Now I'm checking to see if it includes a lowercase Charles in there, right? So these go from left to right. So basically, as the computer reads from left to right, it executes them in order that it runs across them. All right. Any
Question.
question? Yes.
Yes, sir. So, the way I'm understanding that console, that last console log you did, basically ask the question or when it combines. Is there a way to ask the question and as far as like sentence and to lowercase both include that, or is it just using or?
Well, it's not using or. So so we're talking about line 12 right now, right?
Yes.
I get it's not either and or it is then. So look at sentence, change everything to lowercase, then check to see if Charles is included in it. Right. So it is doing them one right after the other.
Okay. It kind of makes sense, but I would think that one would say true, one would say false, because it's not included in both sentence and to lowercase. But if that's the way it works, then that's the way it works. I get it.
Well, no. So this right here, right? So come on, computer. So this, and let me get rid of these two. Right. So this, when I say sentence, right? So if I just say sentence, I get this, right? And here, let me do this. Right. And so everything's uppercase. When I run sentence, I see everything in uppercase. And as soon as I do this, it's moving it to lowercase, right? And so now if I do this, I'm getting true because it's taking my all caps sentence, moving everything to lowercase, and then checking to see if this is included in lowercase. So these are
okay.
these
I
are
understand.
yep, individual operations that happen sequentially, like they happen in the order that we basically read them in.
Okay, I was understanding it completely wrong. I was thinking it was basically two console logs at the same time,
Nope.
but it's just one. Okay, got it. Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so Kathy, no, it's the variable name doesn't mean anything, but if I change this from two lowercase to uppercase, then like if I take an all lowercase sentence, I would get it all in uppercase. But like I said, variable names, we try and give good variable names to help people who are looking at our software get an idea of it. And like nothing will stop me from basically calling this like ham Sammy if I want to, right? So like it doesn't help anyone, it doesn't tell you what's actually in there, and in fact it's misleading, but it won't have any impact. This is what's doing the magic over here. All
Are you
right.
limited to how many methods you can put in chain together?
Not specifically, and you like depending on how complex you whatever you've got going on, like you can see like multiples. And eventually what's going to happen is you'll format like this, right? And you'll keep doing more and more. So it's giving me value of, right? And so like, and you just keep chaining one right after the other in there. And so you'll see this something like this where you have multiples, and probably like the most notorious that you'll see is like if you use all built-ins for reversing a string, and I won't spoil it because I think that's one of the challenges that you have to work on. But yeah, there are only so many built-ins that you have, but you're limited on, even if the software doesn't limit you, if you find yourself where you've like chained a bunch together, sometimes it's better to break it out into separate variables just to make it more readable, right? And because this, and this one's a pretty easy one, and these are all like commonly used built-ins. So I would usually expect like someone with that was like I mean, this basically has made it through a boot camp, is going to understand what these are saying. But you can start writing your own custom methods eventually. And if you're chaining a bunch of them together and it makes it hard for someone to come in and read the code and figure out what's going on, sometimes it's a good idea to split them up and just assign them to different variables that help tell the story.
If you're assigning it to a variable, how would you go about doing that?
Just like I did on line 5. Right. And so like if I do something like this, and then instead of down here, I would just do lowercase sentence. Right. And so, again, this is very obvious. This is very basic. So like 2 lowercase tells me exactly what it's doing. But for some reason, if like the method name didn't tell me exactly what it's doing, I could assign it to a variable that gives a better description of what I'm doing here.
Okay.
And then just run it on this. Kind of like I did yesterday when I did the like the little fake Amazon response, and I just assigned the big long variable name to a short variable name just to make it a little bit more readable as you go through the program. And some of these concepts like I throw out just so to get you thinking about them, and it seems kind of silly like when we're writing them at this level, but like I said, once we start getting into like some of the like bigger things that we've got going on. So like I can pull up. Right, and like even this program isn't overly large, but like giving things a good name, and Python's written in what we call snake case instead of camel case, so everything has an underscore in between it. But if you're not giving these good names, it makes it much more difficult for people to understand what's going on. And like this software is used to, so like for individuals who sign up for the self-paced boot camp, basically like when you sign up, they ask for your GitHub name, and if you provide one, this will parse an automated email and send your GitHub info along with the API keys to basically automatically add you to GitHub. So like a human being doesn't have to do it. It's just like this whole thing's written to be an automated process, right? And again, like we're dealing with like some challenges that are on one page, but like here, and this is going to be spread out. Like this is kind of like boilerplate setup and where it's going, like files to help configure the database. Like I said, this one's smaller, but you can see like we're using all of these different files to help basically keep everything organized. And this is written in Python. It's using the Django framework. And so everyone that starts up a new Django project gets these basic layouts and like all of this boilerplate to help manage everything. So that way, every time you go to a new web server written in Python, like you're not scrambling, looking all over the place. A lot of the things will have like the models will, everyone will have a models file. Everyone will have an apps file, and there'll be different things in those, but it helps you know where to look. But you can see like this gets bigger quicker, and like this is a back end one. Oops. All right, and so this is let's see here. Right, and now this is like a React application. So this is all JavaScript still, but this is going to be written in like a React framework. And this is just kind of a empty tutorial thing right now. But like you can see, like this is like 137 lines of code. And so now giving good variable names, making sure that you're using proper spacing, that your typing is clean, like all of that becomes much more important when you're working with more lines of code at the same time. Right, and using VS Code, like we've got some cheat things in here that help. So like I use a rainbow indent that's not in Replit, so like it helps me visually keep track of how far I am or am not indented. I get color matching with my parentheses, so I've got like a yellow one here, and I'm going to look for, when I highlight it up here, I get the same one down here, and same thing if I delete it. Right, like this one turns bright red and tells me that's the one that's missing. So there's things that will help us keep those things organized. But like I said, these concepts that I talk about, like it may seem a little silly right here where you can see everything you need to right on the screen in a couple lines of code, but we want to build a good foundation because eventually you're going to scale up to stuff that looks like this. And again, like this one is like an empty one. I don't know if I've got anything in here that is like worth looking at on the front end. one might be better. All right, so like here is React, like with a folder structure, like we've got our cascading style sheets, our CSS. We'll have different components in here that feed into each other. Like this is a fairly manageable component. We'll have tests for our components, right? And all of this stuff. And this is like a working application that I can turn on, and like it'll create a web application for us once we turn it on. And again, this file right here, all of this information right here, I'm sorry, in this one, doesn't actually show anything on the screen, but it's used over here, right? And so now we start talking about object-oriented programming and moving data around, and I can use person, the object person here, I can use it all over the place. And if I don't know, like if I'm not keeping things organized and I'm not giving things good names, it can become very difficult to see how the data is being passed around. So, all right. And so in JavaScript, Noel's asking, do indents matter for functionality or just readability? In JavaScript, it is only readability. However, in Python, it is functionality. So in Python, if you are not indented correctly, your program will throw an error and it will break. And it's super frustrating when you're first learning Python, because as you start writing conditional logic and like loops and everything like that, and you have to keep track of your indentation, like I would not want to try and write it in a replit, because you don't get that color coded help that you do when you do it in VS Code. Let's see here, Demand, could I use a function to chain the commands together? I'm not sure what you mean by that. So I'll keep moving forward, but if you've got more on that, let me know. Right. So the file had several types of data. So I'm still not quite tracking like what the base question is there. Like what are you looking to chain together? Like basically like how I was chaining the built-in methods. I mean, if that's the question, yes, you can do that. And you can like you can chain any well, I shouldn't say any built-in method, because not all of them will make sense to be chained in specific order. Just like if I do like a to lower here, and I do this on normal sentence, right? I'm pretty sure this should fail. It should return false. Okay, or it's just going to yell at me saying that you can't do it this way. All right, so I've got to have the to lowercase first. Okay, so and number, it's the same thing. We've already used some built-in methods there. So we use toFixed to set the decimal precision, which the trap there is that it sends it to a string, and then we can convert it. You can also convert a number to a string if you need to. And so let's go ahead and dive into arrays. So these are going to be very useful. And because as you start to do the challenges, when you deal with arrays, you're going to need to learn how to manipulate your arrays by yeah, sorry, Efren, yeah, it's Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. I wouldn't make anyone hang out till 9 o'clock at night on a Friday with me talking about code. And so basically, like, as we start to use challenges with arrays in it, we're going to have a passing familiarity with all of these. And so let's go ahead and dive into what some of these look like. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at push. So that adds an element to the end of the array. Right, so if I do array dot push, and we'll say PD, now notice I'm not console.logging array.push like I would with a string. So if I do that, right, it's giving me the length of the array. Right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that once real quick. So I come back over here to MDM and go to array, and I say dot push, and I scroll down here, look at return value. So dot push returns the new length property of the object upon which the method was called. Right. So if I want to see what the array actually looks like, I have to do the array or console.log the array itself. Right. And so there's my array, and now I have PD tacked on to the end of it there. All right. And so this is permanently mutating the array. Right. If I run this command again, and let's just do this again. Right, so I create my array, I push PD into it, I console.log the array, I see it, I push the value PD a second time, it tacks it on again, and then I console.log it. So I am permanently mutating in place my array, which this works differently than how we were dealing with it when we were doing a string. All right, and so if we then take a look at what's next here, let me just copy paste these over here. Okay, so dot pop removes something from the end of an array. All right, so if I say array dot pop, so I don't have to put anything in there, and I look at array again, right? So notice how the last value has been removed from it. And shift and unshift do the same things, they just do them at the front. So if I do array.shift and I console.log my array again, right, notice Charles has been removed from the array. All right, so unshift adds it back to the front. So you see Charles is there again. All right, so slice and splice, excuse me, are easy to get confused because they sound so similar. Slice returns a copy of the array of starting elements and ending elements. So let's go ahead and take a look at slice over here. All right, the slice method returns a shallow copy of a portion of an array into a new array object selected from the start to the end. End is not included, where start and end represent the index of items in that array. The original array will not be defined. So if that sounded like stereo instructions, they definitely were. But let's go ahead and just like walk through what they give us as a demo here. So for slice, we have animals, ant through elephant. If I look down here, I can do a slice with nothing in it. I can do a slice with a starting value, or I can do a slice with a start and an end value. Right. So if I do just a 2 in here, that's the starting value. And remember, we've got, this is going to be counting from 0. So we're going to be using the index values of the array, right? So if we start from 2, and this says it basically the new object is selected from start to end and not including end, right? So 2, so 0, 1, start counting at 2 and go all the way to the end because we didn't put an ending value. This is what this would return, right? And if we put an ending value in here, so we start counting at 2, so skip 0, skip 1, start counting at 2, count 3, but because 4 is the ending value, it is exclusive. The first number is inclusive, the ending number is exclusive. So that means that we get camel and duck, but we don't count elephant because we're excluding the stopping value. All right. And if we do 1 through 5, because we're basically going to a value past the end, we're going to capture the entire array. We're going to start counting at bison. You can also feed negative numbers into this. So if we give it a -2, we basically start at the end and we go -1, -2, and we get duck and elephant, right? And then if we give it a -1, and because this is a starting value, it's inclusive, right? So we start and we go to -2, and then with this one, because we give it an ending value and it's not inclusive, right? So we've got 2, we start counting, we stop at -1. So that's the same thing as putting 4 in here, right? So we get camel and duck, but I'll also show you why this is a little bit different here. And then if you don't put anything in here, you get the whole array back. So let's go ahead and play with this a little bit. I'm going to bring this over into our here. All right. So I'm going to leave all of these for posterity. All right. And just for right now, I'm also going to comment all of this out. At the end of class, I'll put it back in place. All right. So if I do console.log animals.slice and I just do this, I get the whole thing. Right? So there's the whole thing from ant to elephant, from front to back. Now, if I give it a 0, right? I still get the whole thing because I'm counting, like my starting value is from is inclusive. So I'm starting at 0. So I start counting at ant and I'm including everything in here. If I do 1, all right, I start at bison. If I do 2, I start at camel, 3 at duck, 4 at elephant, right? So if I just put 4 in here, right, I'll just get elephant. Now, this is the starting value. I can also give it an ending value. So if I put a 1 right here, what am I going to return? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
The last item in the array,
I'm sorry, what's that?
the last item in, or the second item in the, from the end.
Nope. Ant bison, that's also incorrect. So
It would just be
Yep.
ant, wouldn't it?
just ant. Yep. So Noel and Ryan got it at the same time there. And because the closing number, the ending number is exclusive. So this tells me to start counting at 0. And from this number forward, no longer count it. Right. So I should just get ant here. Right. And if I put a 2 in here, now I would get ant and bison. Right. And now if I put a 1 in here, now I should just get bison. Right. And if I put a 3 in here or a 4 in here, now I would get bison, camel, and duck, but not elephant. Right. Bison, camel, and duck, but not elephant. Now, we also do negative numbers here, right? So if I do a -1, that means start basically at the last element. If I give it a -2, give me the last 2 elements. All right, and so on and so forth. So -3, -4, all the way up. Now, if I do 1 and 4 here, I should get bison through elephant, right? Or I'm sorry, bison through duck, because, sorry, that was confusing. When I do 4 here, it's exclusive, so it's bison through duck. I misspoke. After I said it right like 20 times in a row, then I said it wrong. So if I do this, I also get bison, camel, and duck. Can anyone take a stab at what the difference might be between these two things? And why it's important that they're different? So in plain English, this slice is telling me start counting at the index position 1 and keep counting until the index position 4, but it is exclusive. This is saying start counting at the index position 1 and keep counting into the last element in the array, which is exclusive. So if I do something like this, watch what happens. Right? As my array grows and shrinks, this will always do everything except for the last element in the array. This will always only do 1 through 4 exclusive. Right? And so even though in this example, they give you the exact same answer, they're not the same thing, right? And they can be used in different situations depending on how you're trying to solve the problem. Yeah, yeah, all of these built-ins, all of this stuff is going to, I mean, I won't say more useful, but one way or the other could be more useful depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, right? Like if you have a problem and the problem is defined that you are going to need to pull out the middle 3 items in an array of 5 items, and you will only ever deal with an array of 5 items, this is the way to do that. if you need to pull out everything except for the first item and the last item in an array, and the array can vary each time, may or may not vary, then this is the way that you would solve the problem. So they're used for different situations, even though in certain instances they can look like they're doing the same thing. All right, and so again, this is, and it said it over here, the original array will not be modified. This returns a shallow copy. So again, when we look at this, whereas when we were, excuse me, doing pop and shift and unshift, they were permanently changing the array up here. So when I do something like this, and I am basically taking a slice of the array from 1 to these 3 elements, I'm getting bison, camel, duck. If I look at the array again itself, it remains unchanged, right? So it's still the same. And again, this is just making a shallow copy, and it's sending it to the console. If I don't do anything else with it, it's gone forever once it's done executing this line of code, unless I save it to a variable name, right? So if I did something like this, right? Now I can also take a look at this in the future, right? And so this is just making a copy of it. And if I want to hang on to that copy for future use, I need to save a copy of it. I need to save it to a variable. All right. And so let me do this as well. All right, we'll throw that link in there. Okay, and then so that is slice. Splice changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements or adding new elements. And so, and before I hop into splice, again, if you're confused, if you don't understand all of this yet, it's perfectly fine. I mean, I didn't understand, like, I was not an expert in slice and splice, even walking out of Code Platoon. Like, it takes a while to get a grasp of all of the things that this can do. And quite honestly, like, if I had a problem at work that it required me to use slice, what I'm going to be doing is exactly kind of like how I walked through it before. Like, I'm going to console.log my best guess at a slice and see what happens. And then I'm going to adjust the numbers, right, as I see fit until it's finally slicing what I want it to slice, right? Like I said, it doesn't cost money to run the code. It's free. Like, when you're developing, like, once your code goes to production, you want it to be right and you want it to be bug free, because if not, like, that's how you cost the company or yourself money. But while you're developing, you can break everything you want to. You can screw it up as many times as you want to, and you can keep nudging the code incrementally, right? Like, no one expects anyone to write everything perfectly, like large chunks of code, small chunks of code perfectly at any given time. But what you're going to want to do is write small chunks of code and run it frequently so you can see exactly what you're doing, so that you don't end up with this big chunk of monster code and it's broken. You have no idea how to unravel all of the knots in it. So we're going to keep writing a little bit of code, hit run, hit a little bit of code, hit run. just so we can see what's going on with everything. All right. So any questions on slice?
Quick question.
Yes.
So how are the instructions going into the computer when you put in a negative value for the exclusive, like if you were to put -4, -2 for the in value? How is the computer taking in those instructions?
It's counting from the end instead of from the front.
Okay, so it's telling, so let's say you have 1 and -2. It's saying start at index 1 and include index 1 because it's inclusive, and then start from the end and give me, would it give you 1 or 2? Because it's still exclusive, correct?
Right. So if we do -2, right? And so right, and so on here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, and what the computer is really doing is I shouldn't say this is what it's really doing, because I don't know how the computer keeps track of it outside of the fact that the computer knows the length of the array, right? And so
Right.
it's saying, like, start counting at 1, so skip 0, count 1, right? So start counting here, count here. Are you -2? Are you 2 values from the end? No, you're not. So count here. Are you 2 values from the end? Yes, you are. Stop counting.
Okay, yeah, that answers my question. I was just trying to see, because it looked like it was going backwards. It was just an imagery type of question.
Yep. And yeah, so it's the same. Like if I change this to a -1, right? Same thing. Bison, camel, duck, start counting at 1. Are you -1? No. Are you -1? No. Are you -1? Yes. Okay. Stop counting. Don't include you. Here is what I return.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
Could the 1 and like the -1 be a variable pulled from somewhere else? If
Yeah.
ever needed?
So I could say, like, right, so I could do this. Right, I could get crazy, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. But like I could do animals dot length -1, right? And so that should give me, if I'm doing my math correct, I think so the length is 5, so that's going to give me 4. So this should give me bison through duck still. Hey, look at that, right? And so if I do -2, right? Now it basically, it says the length is 5, so -5, 1 is 4, -2 is 3. So stop counting at 3, don't include it, and that's what I get, right? So like these can be anything. And I mean, you can get crazy, right? Like I could be like, I could do math in here, like, because even though we see all of this, what the computer actually sees is 1 times 2, so it condenses that down to 2. And the computer sees the length of this is 5, so in memory it changes it to 5, and then it does 5 minus 2, and at the end of the day it ends up looking like this. And that's what the computer sees. Any other questions about that? Okay. All right, so that was slice. Let's go ahead and take a look at splice now. Okay, so splice method changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements and or adding new elements in place to access part of an array without modifying it. I'm sorry, to access part of an array without modifying it, see slice. So this is going to modify in place. So slice makes a copy, splice actually modifies in place. All right, so let's take a look at the syntax down here. So we have a start count, we have a start and a delete. We have a start, a delete, and then item 1, item 2, item n, which just means that you can add an unlimited number of values after the fact that are comma separated. And so what we're going to do here is we can say Jan, March, April, June, and we're going to splice. So we're going to insert at the index of 1, right? So this is an index of 0. This is the index of 1. We're not going to delete anything. So our delete count is 0. And we see this down here. And then we have an item. So we will insert that. And so what we would expect to see at that point is Jan, Feb, March, April, and June. And same thing down here. We're going to count to the index of 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so here we're going to delete 1. Or I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we are going to delete 1 element, right? Which is going to be June. That's there at the end. And then we've got an element to insert, which is going to be May. So when we look at that, we'll have Jan, Feb, March, April, May. And notice that we just have months up here one time, and we've made a permanent change. So this time we add in Feb. So when we come down here and splice again, we're actually counting off of this as well. So it stays put. So let's go ahead and pull this over and let's take a look at this one as well. All right, so if we run this, let me go ahead and comment these out here real quick. All right, so we've got Jan, March, April, June. We're going to count in to the index of 1. Right? And we're not going to delete anything, and then we're going to insert the element Feb, right? So now we have that in there. So now after this command is ran, right, I guess it's already down here, so I don't need to do it again. We'll do this, we'll put our index values in there. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And so that's what it looks like now. And the same thing. So if I change this to 2, it should then say Jan, March, Feb, April. Right? Jan, March, Feb, April. If I change it to 3, we're going to count in even further. Right? And if I come back to here, and if I want to delete something, so if I put a 1 here, instead of Jan, Feb, March, April, I should see Jan, Feb, April, June. Yeah, and if I put a 2 here, all right, now I'm deleting March and April, so it goes Jan, Feb, June. Right, and if I want to add more values, right, I can comma separate them and give additional values. Right. Back this out a little bit. Right, and now I have, so notice that I'm not console.logging the splice, I'm console.logging months. I don't even know what splice returns, if it's return value, an array containing the deleted elements. If only one element is removed, an array of one element is returned. If no elements are removed, an empty array is returned. So if I were to actually console.log this, right, I get an empty array because I didn't delete anything. If I delete something out of there, I get the actual element that I deleted. All right, and then if I do this, right? Oops, months.splice and console.log. Right, so I start up here. I add February into it. I don't delete anything. I come down here. On this one, I count to 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, start deleting, only delete one item, delete June, and then insert the value of May, right? And so here's the final version of the array that we have. Any questions about splice? And again, if you're head swimming, not a huge deal. The big thing is that if you get to a problem and you understand that you need to do something to an array, right? Like if you need a copy of an array, then, or that you need a portion of an array, then you are going to use slice. And if you need to modify an array or replace an element in an array, then you can use splice. And with splice, you're going to use a you're going to use the index position. There is another built-in for an array called index of, which is right here. So an index of returns the index of an element. So you can basically use, like, let's say if you had a million things in an array and you needed a unique value, then, and you knew the name of it, but you didn't know the index value, you could find it with index of, and then use that within a splice from the index of, right? So like, if we were to say, back up, well, here, well, let's do this. Right, so and let's just pretend that this array is huge, right? So if I want to say console.log tech array dot index of we'll say linked in, right? Index of search element string from index number, the value to locate in the array returns the index of the first occurrence of a value in an array, or -1 if it's not present. So if I run this, all right, so there's 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that looks good to me. So what I could do is instead of console.logging this, I could say let target equal this. And now I can say tech array dot splice, and my count is going to be target, and my removal is going to be 1. Right, and so let's go ahead and console.log tech array again. Looks like it's saving. Right, so here is my array with LinkedIn removed. Right, so it'd be a two-step process to do it. And technically, and again, this is more readable, but I don't even need to save it to a variable name. I could do something like this. Right, and this is just harder to read. And because this is small and that I know that the index is 4, like I could just put the number 4 in there or whatever. But this would be like, if I had to do that, or to find specific values and eliminate them in an array, like this is how I would approach that problem. Does that help, Noel? Cool. All right, and so, and that's index of. All right, so we will put that up here. All right, these two we've taken care of. All right, and we've got join. All right, so we can keep working from the same one here. So with join, what join does is joins all elements of the array into a single string. All right, so elements fire. If I just do join with nothing in there, I get comma separated values. If I do an empty string, so just 2 quotes with no space in it, it will just smush all of the words together. And if you put something in there, it will separate everything in there. So let's go ahead and take a look at console.log tech array dot join, and let's go ahead and run it. Right, so there are my values comma separated. If I put an empty string in here, I just get everything smushed together. If I put a space in here, then I get things separated with a space. You can, separate it with whatever you want to. But commas and spaces are typically the most common with that. And so if we then take a look at this, the join method creates and returns a new string. So again, it creates a new string. And so if I go console.log tech array, all right, we can see that my array is still unmodified and it's there. No problem with it. All right. For each and .map I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because these are 2 different ways to loop through an array, right? And in the beginning, you should be focusing on how to use a for loop and how to use a while loop. These can be confusing because they use callback functions and they do 2 very different things. So typically if you have the opportunity to use a for each or a dot map, I would recommend using a for loop or a while loop instead. So for each method executes a provided function once for each element in the array, right? And so like this is a very basic one. So let me just grab this here real quick. All right, so when I run this, right, I get it basically it's just going through and it's running a function, and this is a callback function here. And we're going to run this function for each of the elements, right? And so I could do something like this. Right, 246. And so basically what I've done is I've created a function that says output the element that I give it, right? So just like we do in a for loop, and basically multiply it by 2. So the first time through, it does 1 times 2. The second time through, it does 2 times 2. Third time through, it does 3 times 2. And it shows me 2, 4, and 6. Now, if I do console.log array 1, right, there I am still, I still have my original array. A dot map. So a dot map method creates a new array populated with the result of calling the provided function on every element in the array. And so if I do this one, oops. Right, so this is doing the same thing. I'll even name it the same. So element is element times 2, right? And we're saving it to a variable here, right? And then we console.log it, and we're actually getting it in an array still, right? And if I do console.log array 2, it is still unchanged. Right, so there's my array 2. And same thing up here. If I take all of this and like if I take the console.log out of here and just do this, I don't think it returns anything, so we get undefined, right? So for each is just going through and doing a function, or it is basically doing something to each element in the array and then outputting it. And or well, not even outputting, it's just doing that to an array. So if you're not outputting it, it doesn't do anything. And the for each itself doesn't return anything. The map does the same thing where it goes through and does whatever you tell it to each element in the array, but it actually returns an array of those changed values, right? And so if you want to do either of these things and it's confusing you, I would say just tackle it in a for loop, right? Like this is a lot less code than a for loop. And once you get comfortable and looping and when you should iterate and when you would either want a dot map or a for each, then absolutely switch to these. But don't, if you don't understand how a for loop works yet or where you would use one, I wouldn't dive into the deep end quite yet. All right. That is all the talking as far as the built-ins for arrays this evening. Are there, let's see here. Are there any other questions on the built-ins before we start jumping into challenges tonight? And also we can take a small break here before we get to the challenges.
I have no questions at this time, but I do admit to definitely feeling like I'm in the deep end, and it's going to take actually sitting down and doing it to be more comfortable. So I don't mind saying that I'm feeling definitely ill at ease, but excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other thing too, is if you are, and if you take on a challenge and you're having problems, I mean, feel free to send me the challenge you're working on as well. And I can look at it with you. I'm usually okay to hop into like a quick Slack huddle or whatever, or Zoom call if we need to.
Okay. Thank you.
So just let me know. But yeah, it's perfectly fine that you feel ill at ease. And so all of this stuff and the purpose of this is not necessarily for you to master it. It's just so that you're seeing it for the first time and that you're starting to get your hands on it so that you're not going through this feeling on your first day of actual boot camp.
Right. And definitely having this class for me at least is more helpful that, you know, I started out trying to do the self, and this way I'm more disciplined, if I could just be so candid.
Yep. Cool. So it is 7:49. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I'll start back up at 7:55 and we'll dive into some of the challenges unless anyone else has got any questions at that time. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. So again, I know I tossed a lot out during the first part of class, doing the built-in methods with the array. If it's not all gelling yet, don't worry about it. I mean, it's still very early on, and the intent of this is just to make sure that everyone's getting some exposure to these different concepts so that they know that they're out there. Again, as always, if you have issues, if you have questions, if you're confused, feel free to stop me, to ask for clarification. If you don't want to do it during class, you're always more than welcome to Slack me in the hours outside of class. And I'll usually respond as quickly as I can. And I'm more than happy to walk through it one-on-one as well, or answer any questions, or if you're running into problems on the challenges, let me know. I'll help you troubleshoot. All right, so we're going to hop into the challenges here, and we're going to do convert to hours and minutes. With that, we're going to, and I've already forked this over here, but just as to show it here, we click on the link, we go to the CP admin copy, we're going to go up there, we're going to click the fork button, we get a pop-up menu, we click the fork button again. I don't need to fork this one again because I've already done it. In each challenge, there's going to be the index, which is kind of the default file that opens up. And there's going to be a README, which gives us the instructions on what we need to do each time. So write a function that takes in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes. All right, so we've got here 2 test cases. Hours, minutes, 125 should be exactly equal to a string of 2 hours and 5 minutes. And 175 should be a string exactly equal to 2 hours and 55 minutes. So let me grab our prep here real quick. Let me shut my bedroom door. grab this from here. All right, so we're going to walk through our prep with this. So for parameters, we have one parameter, which is a number. And it basically represents minutes, right? We're going to have a return, which is going to be a string that accounts for the minutes in whole hours and remaining minutes. All right, example, I'll just say see below because we have our test written out for us already. And we're going to pseudocode it. All right, so first step here, I'm going to take my total minutes and convert into whole hours. Then need to figure out how to come up with the remaining minutes. Then need to return hours, minutes in a formatted string. Are there any edge cases that I can think of? All right. Can anyone think of any edge cases or any weird situations that might arise from this?
What do you mean by edge cases?
So an edge case is something that isn't going to happen every time, but it might happen, and it might it might make our program not work correctly.
Okay, so something that would like break the program or the code.
Yep, or in this case, maybe make it not look right.
Adding seconds.
I don't think we'll need seconds, but like the one off the top of my head is, right, is we've written two tests here, right? And so we've got 2 hours and 5 minutes and 2 hours and 55 minutes, right? What happens if I put 120 in here, right? So 2 hours and 0 minutes reads pretty good, right? But what happens if I put 121 in here? Does that look right? Do we have 1 minute? Or do we have 1 minute?
1 minute.
Right. And same thing, if I were to do 61, then I don't have 1 hours anymore, right? Like I only have 1 hour. And those are edge cases, right? And so just by looking at my tests that are written for me down here, this isn't handling all of the possible things that could pop up when I run my program. So we'll start with this and we'll get these tests to pass, and then we'll start to look at some of the edge cases that might arise here, right? So all right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So first things first, I want to make sure that I know what I'm seeing with my parameters coming in, right? So I'm getting minutes coming in here. So let's go ahead and console.log minutes, right? And I see 125 and 175. So I know that I have access to them. All right, so first things first, I need to figure out how to get whole hours out of here, right? So if I take minutes and my first guess is I'll just divide it by 60 here and let's see what happens. Right? I get 2.083 repeating and I got 2.916 repeating, right? So I'm getting decimals and I really just need the whole hours. So what are a couple of ways that I could tackle this? Take the floor, right? So we could do some math.floor here. I don't think it's float.floor. It should be math.floor,
Yeah, my bad.
right? And so now if we do this, there are my whole hours, right? So I've got 2 hours, 2 hours. Let's go ahead and do 3 hours and 59 minutes. Let's see if we get a 3 out of this. Oh, we get a 2 again. Well, that's because I changed it here and didn't change it here like a total knucklehead. 3 hours is 180 plus 59. So that's going to be 239. Right. That looks better. So now I'm getting my 3. Right. So instead of this being a console.log now, I could say let whole hours equal math.floor.60 minutes, right? And I can return a string. We need to do it as a string. So we'll start here. We'll do whole hours, right? So we're still getting false there, but we know that we're returning something out of here. Let's do this real quick. Right, so we're returning our 2 hours out of here. Just do this to each of them. All right, so 2, 2, and 3. So there's our whole hours coming out of there. We know for right now, we need it to say something like this. So 2 hours and 5 minutes. All right, so we'll just do 2 hours. Right, so there we go. There's our hours. Now we need to figure out how many minutes are left. So what would be a good way to find out what our remaining minutes are? So we're going to take minutes and it looks like we're getting a lot of the modulus of the remainder 60, right? So we can go in here and we could say minutes because we haven't done anything to minutes yet, right? Like we divided it by 60, but we saved it to this value. We still have our minutes here and we can do remainder 60. And before we save this to a variable, let's go ahead and console.log it and make sure we know what we're getting. All right, so 125 should be 2 hours and 5 minutes, 55 minutes, 59 minutes, right? So this is probably the cleanest way to do that. The other way we could do it is we could always take our whole hours and multiply that by 60 and subtract that from minutes as well. That's another way to solve this, but that's more code than this. So this is like the cleanest way to do it. And we know that we're getting what we want out of this. So let's go ahead and we'll uncomment this. Right, and we'll say and this, and so let's go ahead and return this. Well, we need to add minutes here. All right, so 2 hours and 5 minutes, 2 hours and 55 minutes, 3 hours and 59 minutes. So let's go ahead and delete this and this and this. Right, those all return true. Now let's take a look at something like this. So let's create, this is technically for what they're asking for, this would be a solution. However, we're going to take it a step further and we're going to look at how we can make this a better solution. All right, so what happens when we have 1 hour and 1 minute? And what happens when we have 1 hour and 0 minutes? And let's do one more here. Let's do 0 hours and, or actually, I'm sorry. I'm typing these in and I should be typing them in like this. So if we do 61 minutes, we're going to want 1 hour and 1 minute. And we can probably hit both the edge cases in just for that right now. All right. So how do we basically tell our computer program to take one of two branches? Like to do one thing, and if that doesn't work out, do the other thing. So yep, if else statement, see that in the chat, and if statement. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. So we could say if whole hours is triple equal to 1, we'll say we'll do this. We'll say let oh, I'm trying to think how I want to do this. It'll be a little clunky doing it this way, but we'll just call it is our singular, and we'll say let is, well, that's usually a true or false. So we'll just call it our singular or plural. All right. And so now if I console.log our singular or plural and run it, I get undefined, right? Because we have not assigned it a value. We have only created the variable, but we have not assigned it a value yet. So what I can do here is I can say, basically, if that is equal to 1, I can say hours, our, that's a dumb name. I'm sorry. I'm just going to call this hour marker and min marker. That's a lot less to type. All right. And so hour marker is equal to hour, else hour marker is equal to hours. All right. And so now, instead of having just hours in here every time, I can replace this with the value variable hour marker. Right. And so now when I run this, and I'll just take this. Console.log it. All right, so now I have 2 hours and 5 minutes, 3 hours and 59 minutes, 1 hour and 1 minute, right? And now I can do the same thing. Right, with remaining minutes. And we can say, oops. All right, and so now when I have plural, I get minutes. If I only have one, I get minute. Right, and I'm getting true for everything here. So now, when, oh, where were we? Where I had mentioned that we saw the thing with the question mark and the colon. I said that's a ternary operator, and I said that's just a shorthand way to do an if-else statement. I'm going to show you how we can clean this code up by using a ternary operator, right? And it's just shorthand. So, and I'll put this down here. So ternary operator. So if has anyone ever seen a ternary operator used, or if they used one before, even if they weren't sure what they were doing? Okay, so we've got one person. So if I want to convert this into a ternary operator, so I can say, okay, so we'll say what ternary equal A1 okay, and so what are you yelling at me about? Unreachable code detected. We have a offset return somewhere. I'm not sure why that's returning unreachable. That's weird because I'm not in a method. Okay, I'm not sure what I'm doing to blow this up other than
You have it with an N in the actual chat. Is it supposed to have an N there, or
sorry, what's that?
So up in the text, you have ternary instead of ternary. Is it supposed to be the Arnie?
Oh no, that
I doubt
doesn't
it,
matter.
but
That's just a,
yeah,
that's
no, that
just a
wouldn't
typo.
impact it. I just wasn't sure if it was a different spelling.
Yeah, well, so I'm not sure why that's telling me it's unreachable. I'm sure I'm doing something silly, but it won't matter because I'm going to basically, this is just so that we can see the format of it. And it's going to look just like this. And I will, yeah, is this protected or something?
Not sure if you actually need the equals equals, right? Since you already said it, A equals 1 up top. So like that A would be equal either true or false already, right?
Well, no, because if I just do this, it's
Oh yeah, you're right.
1. So I'm
Yeah.
comparing it to this. I'm confused, like I've got to have a typo somewhere as to why I'm, and that this is why, because I'm missing, no, yes. No, I'm not. Okay. I don't know why. For demonstration purposes only, this is the format we're going to use. I've got to blow something up at least once a class. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into hour marker and I'm going to say whole hours triple equals 1. And I'm going to do a question mark. And the first value is what happens if I have a true. And the second value is what happens if I have a false. Right. And so I've replaced all of this with just this up here. Right. And so now I can do the same thing here. And I can say remaining minutes triple equals 1. If so, if that's true, give me minute, or else give me minutes, right? And now I'm going to take this if statement and I can delete this one as well, right? And I don't need, I'll leave the console.log for a little bit, but so now instead of having to have the big if statement, all of that is condensed down into this, right? And I get my hours and minutes and my hour and my minute, right? And I can, if I do something like this, so let's go ahead and say 62 minutes, right? Like, so now I should get 1 hour and 2 minutes, so we can split them. Right, I get a true, there's my 1 hour and 2 minutes. So all of that comes through, and I've just solved the problem with less code, right? And now I can delete this console.log. And now I have this, and this is, again, we went a little bit further, but we should, when we look at something, and again, this is thinking like a programmer, we need to look at a program and say, okay, well, if I do it this way, what things could possibly break this? And this would break, and not break like where it won't put output, but it won't look right if we just did it the original version, because then we'd have 1 hours and 1 minutes and so on and so forth. And this is a cleaner, more readable program when we do it this way. And this is still driving me nuts. Oh, I know why. It's because I put return here, and that's why I can't reach it. I don't know why I did return here. Yeah, so that was it. The silly mistake on my part, but yeah, so I mean, this again is all just for an example, just to show that what this is.
What was the reason why it didn't work with the return statements?
Because I put a return there, and everything after a return is unreachable. And technically I'm not inside of anything, so the return isn't doing anything, but like the IDE was still lighting up, trying to warn me that I was doing something silly. All right, and so this would, it would actually be like, let X equal or not be equal to anything, and then we would say X is equal to it is, or X is equal to it is not. And we can't redeclare X, so we wouldn't have both of these at the same time. But this is the exact same thing as this up here. We're just seeing it done with less text. What would happen if you put in 59 minutes? So with that, we would get 0 hours and 59 minutes. Should be 0 hours and 59 minutes. All right, so that's what we're getting from that. All right, and if we're going to do just 1 minute, right, we should get 0 hours and 1 minute. Still get the true. And if we just put a 0 in here, we should get 0 hours and 0 minutes. And still getting that true. All right. Any other questions on what I did here? All right, so let's see here. Let's go back to the old list. So what does right triangle look like? Okay, so that's literally just copying that into a function. So we can skip that one for now. Is this one? Okay, that one would probably be a little tough for the time that we have left. Let's do SpaceX countdown. And so this will be one that I will break everyone out into groups and probably give you 20 minutes to work on it. And then I'll bring everyone back and I'll go over the solution for the last 10 minutes of class. So we're going to show files. Got the README. All right, and so you're going to need either a for loop or a while loop for this one. And so if you have questions or issues with it, just remember you can go back to in the slides, page 40 and 41. I would say tackle it with a while loop. That way, and you can use this format to take care of it. And we've got, right, and it looks like just basically there are 5 seconds left until liftoff, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. They skip 2 seconds, they've got 1 second and 0 seconds, and then liftoff. So write a function that takes an integer as seconds and prints how many seconds there are until liftoff. Once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. All right, so here is the link to that. Give me just a moment here and I will set up the breakout rooms. And we've got, looks like 14 people left. So I can split everyone out into, looks like groups of 3, and there will be one group of 2. And let me, where are the breakout rooms? All right, so let me pause here real quick.